young Hazara, born in Afghanistan and fled to Australia in 2006. With the Taliban making countless vague and empty promises, such as not taking away the rights of women and girls from getting an education or having the right to work, simply because the whole world is watching them right now. What is the Australian government's plan once the Taliban reneges on their alleged promises, especially once the world turns away its attention from Afghanistan in a few days, a few weeks, or a few months?
Yalda, let me start with you on this. You have actually spoken to Taliban representatives as part of that extraordinary piece we saw tonight on Foreign Correspondent. And you also took an unexpected call the other day while you were live on air on the BBC from a Taliban spokesman as well, who told you there will be no revenge on anyone. Can the assurances we're hearing from the Taliban really be believed?
Well, David, you saw that extraordinary press conference that the Taliban had a few days ago. It was very similar to what I've heard the Taliban say before. They said it to me on air. They said it to me face-to-face when I travelled to Doha. They said that women would have their rights. There wouldn't be any revenge attacks or reprisals. But I spent the better part of 3 weeks in Afghanistan a few weeks ago, and you saw that report on Foreign Correspondent. And I sat down with Taliban frontline commanders who are fighting this war at the moment. And I asked him a series of questions, and he said to me, we want to return to the kind of rule that we had in the 90s. So when I asked about, for example, if a woman was accused of adultery, now adultery based on whose judgment, he said, well, of course we would have stonings. He said we would have public executions use sort of soccer stadiums to do that kind of thing. There would be amputation of hands and feet if someone were to commit the crime of theft. He said, this is all laid out in the Quran. This is all part of our Sharia law. And if you want to live within it, great. If not, you'll face the kind of reprisals that you need to.
So, Diana, what do you think about this talk of some sort of Taliban 2.0?
Yeah, well, exactly that, David. It's just talk. The ideological sort of mentality hasn't shifted. What has is that they've got a very sophisticated PR machine now, and they've now got social media at their disposal. Just because that they've got a spokesperson and they're able to use Twitter doesn't necessarily erase the ideology, their stance on women's rights, on how they will continue to persecute other minority groups and others at risk in the country. I don't trust anything that they're actually now spinning.
Lydia, does the Taliban need international support, engagement more than it once did? And indeed, do you think this is an organisation capable of reforming?
Well, I think it's an important question, and I think the points Deanna made are spot on, is that, the best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. And we only have to look at what the Taliban did in the 90s when they originally came to power. They said exactly the same things. They said there won't be any reprisals, we won't go door to door, our rule will not be brutal. But then we saw what happened. They governed according to this archaic and brutal Islamic rule that, frankly, many of the world's Muslims do not consider as legitimate.
Yes.
And so, to me, we should not be expecting any significant change. Saying that, however, they certainly do, for the time being, do crave international legitimacy. They need the aid that's coming in. And so they're going to be making the right noises at the moment. But again, their ideology hasn't changed. Their vision for Afghanistan hasn't changed, and we shouldn't expect it to.
So, Bob Carr, coming back to Mustafa's question, if once this global spotlight moves on, moves away, and we do see the Taliban revert to what we've always known about them, what then should countries like the US and Australia do?
Well, it's got to be said that their rule in Afghanistan between 1996 and 2002 was monstrous. There were massacres, along with all the institutionalised systemic cruelties towards women and girls. There are two things we've got to focus on, given the limitation on any impact we can have. One is reopening our embassy as soon as possible, and doing so moving in partnership with like-minded countries, the Europeans, the Canadians. The Americans would certainly want us to have eyes and ears in Kabul as resumed as soon as possible. Obviously, we've got to move as if the promise of international engagement will make the leadership of the Taliban aware of the impact on world opinion of any return to the abuses that they practiced so monstrously, so systemically, 1996 to 2002. The other thing is to use our relationships with certain nations in the Arab world, with Pakistan, to send messages to the Taliban leadership. Again, reminders that the world is watching. They can isolate themselves from the world if they want, but there will be costs and penalties associated with that. I know all this sounds pretty lame, but the end of our military presence there means that our options are very much limited.
Well, Darren Chest, let me just cut to the chase on that point. Whether it's engaging back in Afghanistan with an embassy, engaging Pakistan and other regional neighbours, is the bottom line. Even if we see human rights atrocities under the Taliban in Afghanistan, we're not sending troops back in.
Well, David, I agree with your earlier speakers that the Taliban will be craving legitimacy in the eyes of the international community. But we have every right to be very sceptical about any change in behaviour. I mean, if we're going to see change, we need to see it now. And the first example of that would be allowing clear passage for people who are seeking to leave, who have visas to leave, who are seeking to access the airport and seeking to be repatriated to a safer location. That would be the first sign that the Taliban is serious about behaving differently this time compared to last time. But I have no confidence that we'll see any improvement in behaviour.
So if we don't?
The attitude towards women and children and minority groups.
So if we don't, though, the bottom line is we're not going back in.
Well, David, that's not a decision you can expect me to make as a backbencher in Gippsland.
You can have a view.
The reason we first engaged in Afghanistan all those years ago, which I'm sure we'll get to during tonight's conversation, was around preventing it becoming a haven for basing global terrorism attacks. It morphed into a different role in following years and became a nation-building role to some extent. So we're not likely, as we sit here today, to be talking about Australian military presence other than what we're seeing right now, which is that humanitarian effort to repatriate Australians and visa holders, people who have worked with the coalition forces and in fact saved lives on the ground in Afghanistan over these past 20 years by the work they've done with the Australian and coalition forces.
And we will come to that, but Yalda, just coming back to you on this, is the Taliban aware of this reality, that the US and its allies are not going to return there simply because, or only because, of human rights atrocities that it might commit?
Yes, they are aware of this, and the conversations I had with them in Doha and Afghanistan was that we are not going to turn Afghanistan into some kind of terrorist haven. The issues of human rights and women's rights, that memo hasn't trickled down to the foot soldiers and the commanders, but one thing that has been passed right round is you make it clear that you in no way are affiliated with groups like Al-Qaeda, for example. But we know from the assessments of US intelligence, US Treasury, the UN, that continue to put out reports as early as just a few months that the Taliban are still very much linked and protecting Al-Qaeda in the country. I'm also getting reports from people who are in the provinces. They're sending me videos and photographs of foreign fighters in the country. Of course, as the BBC and as all journalists, we have to ensure that we verify the authenticity of those videos. But these are the sorts of things that are now starting to emerge, where even residents of Kabul are saying to me they're hearing foreign languages and they're seeing fighters from places like Yemen, Iraq, Syria operating in the country. So as Bob Carr said there, that it's quite important that the international community at least has the presence of their diplomatic staff in the country as eyes and ears.